Hello and welcome to End of Life Training. My name is Stephen Davis and I'm a registered nurse. So before we move on, I just want us to take a minute to think about what end of life means to us. It can bring back some emotions, it'll stir up some feelings. Some of us will feel it's very taboo and we shouldn't talk about it. Some of us may feel this is poor timing and we shouldn't talk about it. And others may remind them of loved ones that they've lost and therefore don't want to talk about it because it provokes those emotions. The reality is we have to talk about it and we have to prepare for it. There's a thing that we strive for in nursing and that's called the good death, which means it's personal centred and the person that's experienced their end of life is supported and cared for and loved for in a way which meets their needs. So unless we have the conversations, we're unable to prepare to meet needs for loved ones. Equally, it's about making sure their wishes are heard and people understand their wishes. So whilst we go through this session, I want us to think about the subject and our own thoughts and feelings towards it. Remember, as humans, we all have our own feelings, we have our own values that have got us this far in life. And it's important that we don't pass on our feelings and our values onto others, and that we allow them the time to talk to us about their needs, wishes and wants. There's never a good time to talk about end of life. However, surely it makes more sense that we talk now while we are well, and while we have capacity and we can consent to treatment and care, then wait for it to happen further down the line when we're struggling to cope with our everyday lives and then dealing with an illness. It makes it much harder. And when we think about our needs and wants, if we think about them now, we're more likely to say what we want without fear or worry. So my advice to you is, when talking about end of life, have those discussions early on with people, start the dialogue and try to create and change a culture where it's okay to talk about our feelings rather than waiting for a time when it's going to become a lot more difficult. So, what will we cover? We're going to cover things about the staff and what the skills people need. We're going to look at the different types of groups of people that this affects. We'll look at different ways of communicating. We'll recognise when service users are towards the end of their life, and we'll recognise and provide bereavement care if and when needed. So first of all, why do we communicate? So we communicate for a range of reasons, but in caring towards the end of life, we communicate in ways to express our needs and our desires. We need to think about how we're going to ask for help. We need to look about, if we are asking for help, how people are understanding us. Remember, towards the dying stages, our communication it could decrease. We may end up confused, we may be on medication, and we may be very unwell, so we can't communicate in the same way that we normally would. Equally, it's important to thank people and show people that we're still working with them and for them. So how do we communicate? 55% is through body language, 7% is through what's said, and 38% is through tone. So it's important that whilst working for people towards the end of life, we start looking at the body language, we look for the gestures. We know that consent is really important, and again, please watch our training video on consent. We also know capacity is important. So again, please watch our training video on capacity. But what happens if you can't say, yes, I want treatment, or no, I don't want treatment? Well, we're going to go for implied consent. And an example of implied consent could be, can I take my medication? And I can't say yes or no, but I put my hand out, or maybe I open my mouth. So the actions in which I have done will make you think that you've gained consent from me. We know that we have verbal communication, and when we talk, it's important that we clarify what people tell us. Language can become a barrier, especially if you're working in a cosmopolitan area where there's lots of different languages, etc. So how can we cross those bridges? Could we Google Translate? Could we write things down? Could we have an interpreter? We know that we communicate through tone and pace and volume. It's really important, however, that we learn these skills down at the bottom. So summarising, paraphrasing and questioning. When we summarise something, it's important that I tell you what I think I've heard. The reality is when you're talking, you may end up confused and think, oh, they said quite a lot. It's really useful for you to summarise and say, well, okay, so everything you've told me, is this what you're meaning by it? Are you sure that's what you meant? So you're giving the person an opportunity to correct your understanding. Paraphrasing is really important because it's a way of you showing you've actively listened to somebody and that you've understood what they've said. Great phrases are, so what I'm hearing is, what you've told me is, am I right in thinking that? So you're saying to the person, this is what I've heard, this is what I think, this is what I feel. And then finally, good questioning. So we have our open questions and our closed questions. And when we're talking about end of life, it's really important we get some of this information correct. For example, hello Mr. Jones, my name's Stephen. Let's have a little discussion about your end of life plans. Have you thought about what will happen when you pass over? Do you have any plans in place? Closed question. He'll say yes or no. Then what I might ask is, what are your plans? Why did you choose those plans? He may say to me, I want to be buried. I may then paraphrase back or summarise and say, okay, so what you're telling me is you want to be buried. Is that correct? So I've heard it twice and I've confirmed it twice. Why have you chosen a burial and not a cremation? Oh, we have a family plot or something like that. So again, we've got this understanding coming through, because what you don't want to do is ask a closed question. So Mr. Smith, how would you like, what's going to happen to your body when you pass over, a burial or cremation? And he goes, cremation, but you think you've heard burial. You can't undo some of these things. So it's really important that when we hear decisions about what's going to happen to our body, decisions around do not resuscitate, decisions around treatment or medication, it's really important we test those. If we can't, then we need to still go through non-verbal. And remember, capacity of consent is fluid. So just because somebody may not have had it yesterday doesn't mean that they haven't got it today. Just because somebody cannot talk does not mean that they lack capacity, and it doesn't mean that they lack the ability to give consent. So again, we can touch, we can use facial expressions, we can use eye gestures, we can look around us, we can have a sense of humour, we can do lots of things to try and establish non-verbal communication. I love this phrase because I think this is really, really important. We are given 2 ears but only 1 mouth. And this is because listening is twice as hard as talking. Just remember that when you're talking to somebody about their end-of-life decisions. A poor listener is somebody who makes no eye contact, who doesn't look interested, who's looking at their watch, who's saying yes, no, without actually putting them at the appropriate times. And the reality is, if you're having a sensitive conversation with somebody and you're trying to build trust and rapport and you're trying to get needs, wishes and wants across, it's really important that we do this in a dignified way, which shows respect and it shows that we're actually interested in what that person has to say. So becoming a good listener involves facing the person. Egan has a great theory around the way in which we should sit, so it's called solo, where we sit together we lean forward, we open up our body language, and then we repeat what's being said to us. Maintaining eye contact is really important because we want to see the emotion, we want to understand what they're saying. We know 55% is said through body language, so it's really important we listen. We want to avoid distractions around end-of-life conversations. So if you are going to have a discussion with, the end-of-life stages, please make sure you're not going to be distracted because you'll break people's train of thought, people will feel embarrassed, and it's very hard to restart a conversation up with somebody. Show that you're interested, use those paraphrasing skills. Okay, so what you just told me is, am I right in saying that? What I've heard was. Don't interrupt them, so watch their mouth. Wait until you see their lips have stopped moving and then ask your questions. And again, respond to what you're being told. Look for the behaviours as well. So again, people may start to get aggressive and agitated because you can see this is uncomfortable. What's really important in this stage is for you to acknowledge what you are seeing. So it's okay to say to somebody, I can see that this is upsetting you, I can see you're upset about this, or I can see you're angry about this. Do you want to stop? Shall we find another time to carry this discussion on? You may end up with other behaviours where it's passive, manipulative, people may become avoiding it, or people will become very assertive. So it's important to understand that end in life will trigger these emotions around people. Again, other ones on there may be very negative, and some people may become very flippant, so they don't really care what's being said because they just don't care anymore. What's important is we challenge that and we try to understand why we're seeing what we're seeing. Now, this section becomes a little bit more tricky because now we're going to look at some of the things that we may be asked whilst we're discussing end-of-life care. Some of the things you may be asked is, am I going to die? Am I going to get better? Or will I be in pain when I die? And all of these questions are incredibly difficult for somebody to answer. I want us to think about the 6 C's that we have in care. Kind, caring, courage, commitment. It's not easy to have these discussions. You'll need good communication skills and you'll need courage. But let's think about some of the ethics behind what we do. Am I going to die? How would you feel if you knew you were going to die, but somebody had lied to you and said, no, you're not? Yes, we want to give people hope. We obviously don't want to say you're going to die tomorrow. That's not what we want to do. But should we be taking away people's rights to plan? Imagine you laying there on a hospital bed. You have your family and all your affairs to get into order. The nurse comes, you ask the carer and you say, am I going to die? And the carer goes, no, you'll be fine. Don't worry, don't talk like that. You give this person hope that they're going to get better, but what you do, you take away them the opportunity to say their goodbyes, to get their affairs in order. And that doesn't seem right somehow, does it? So I want you to think about, what will you say when somebody says to you, am I going to die? You may come back with some simple responses such as, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. I'll ask the nurse or the doctor to come over and see you. Because I'm a registered nurse, I certainly won't lie to a patient. That's not within our code of practice, and we believe honesty is the best policy. So therefore, I may say to them, the prognosis is not good. Am I going to get better? Again, we want people to have hope in recovery and we want them to get better. But there are certain conditions and illnesses And end of life stages, we know that you're not going to get any better. So it's about being honest again. Will I be in pain when I die? The honest answer is I don't know that you'll be in pain when you die. However, we can talk about that now, or we can talk about pain management. So it's a great opportunity for you to relay and stop that worry. So say to somebody, well, are you worried about being in pain? And if they say yes, you say, have you thought about the medication that's available there? Have you thought about treatment options? Because there are a lot of options. How long am I expected to live? Again, a very common question. One in which we can't normally answer, but we can give you an estimate. You may not be able to answer that, so again, it may be the case of referring that back to the specialist. What will happen to me at the very end? So this question is one in which I would again ask the patient back. I would say to them, what would you like to happen at the very end? So this gives me an ability to start planning their end-of-life care. When will I know someone has died? People are looking for assurance on this question. When I talk to people about end-of-life care, one of their greatest fears is waking up in a mortuary or waking up in a funeral parlour. So it's important that we assure them and say, when it's your time, 2 people will check your end of life. You'll have somebody will listen to your heartbeat, they'll check your breathing, and it will be signed off by 2 people. And it gives the assurance that actually, once you've passed, you've passed. And then why me becomes a very, very difficult one. And this is the one in which normally triggers anger. It triggers anger from the person that's on end of life, and it can trigger anger from the family. So it's really important to be there and to understand that anger is going to exist. So think about what you would say if you're helping a customer who's experiencing end of life, and what you would say to any of these. So what's our role? Well, we need to be a point of contact. So if we're going and we're providing care and we're doing everything we can, people will look at you as the expert. It's important that we coordinate all the care and we act as a go-between, maybe between the many multidisciplinaries. We need to provide clear and understandable information. So it's useful for you to kind of read or understand what the doctors and nurses are saying, and then summarise that into your own words. So the patient understands, or the customer understands in plain English what is going on and when it's going to happen. Providing emotional support is clearly important. People need to know it's okay to be upset, people need to know that it's okay to be angry, and people need to be able to express those. And finally, towards their dying stages, you'll have to step up and become more of the advocate. You will have had discussions and documented things with that person that other people may not be aware of. So it's important that you're able to be that voice when they no longer have a voice. If we think about the multidisciplinary teams, there's many different people involved in a care package. We've got doctors and nurses, the Macmillan nurses, which are specialists, right the way down to mental health capacity advocates. So you can see there's an array of people involved. Surprisingly enough, towards their dying stages, people get fed up with all of this. They just want to be left alone. And again, there's things there in which we need to be taking advanced decisions and recording them. So when we go out and we do an assessment, we do what's called a holistic assessment on the customer. We're going to do background information, just a bit about them, so a couple of paragraphs of who they are and where they're coming from. We need to assess their physical needs, so how can we maintain those needs towards the end of life stages and the dying stages. We'll look at their social needs, so who are their family, are they parts of any groups, are they parts of any religious groups, can we bring people in. The psychological needs to be cared for. Imagine you just laying there in your bed day and night, no music, no TV on, and the only thought running through your head, well, when will it happen? So it's important we try and meet those. And again, if they have any spiritual needs, are those needs being met? There is a framework in which we use in the UK, which is called the Gold Standards Framework. And the Gold Standards Framework literally looks at how to plan for a good death. So, do we have a diagnosis? Do we know how long it's going to go on for? How many weeks is it going to be? What will happen in the final days? And what is your aftercare? So the care plan for end of life needs to take into account all of these things. What's the assessment? What are you hoping for? What will be achieved? What are your clear outcomes? What interventions do you want? And when will the care plan be reviewed? Think about the law though around end of life. We have consent, so again, it's a massive subject, consent. We have mental capacity and our capacity acts. We look at advanced care planning, so making the decisions while you are able to. And that might be things as when to stop food and fluid. It may be things of what medication you want. Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to have surgery? You may have advanced decisions to refuse treatments. You may have a DNR, so a do not resuscitate. And if you do have a DNR, it's done on a red sheet of paper with a red border, and you are not allowed to accept a photocopy. It must be an original DNR copy. And then finally, if they lack capacity, does anybody have the lasting power of attorneys over them? If we've got advanced care plan, advanced decisions, we know that we're treating the person in the way in which they want to be treated towards the dying stages. It's important that we treat dignified care, and the reality is, treating people with dignity is a simple word, but a very complex task. Part of being dignified is the way that we communicate with people, so we use the correct voice, pace and tone. It's about showing respect to them. It's about providing privacy, to have those discussions and to have intimate times with people that they love and give them space. It's about the right to choose what they want and when they want it. It's about inclusion and ensuring that people are still involved and they still have access to things. It's about meeting any of their needs and making sure we're treating people fairly. It's about offering the right pain control. It's about ensuring we're providing the right nutrition and meals. We need to think about the right hygiene and how we're going to give personal care. It's about safeguarding, it's about knowing when to blow the whistle, and finally, it's a time it all together for the end of life. Now, we're aware that during end of life, abuse can happen, and we know there's many types of abuse out there, and again, you need to do the adult protection training to understand this fully. But we have psychological, physical, domestic, modern slavery, material, sexual neglect, organisational or institutional, and discriminatory abuse. So we need to keep an eye out, especially towards the dying stages, that people aren't being manipulated, that they're not having their finances controlled, and that they are making decisions of their own free will. So issues around then end of life and death. We clearly need a verification process to make sure that the death is verified correctly, and people need to be aware of this because it's not easy registering a death. It can be quite distressing, and the worst time to find out about how to register a death is after losing somebody. So if you have the knowledge beforehand, it makes the process a little bit easier. And each council may do it slightly different. Some will do it from the undertaker, some will have to do it directly from the council. Again, you may have a coroner, so if the person hasn't been known to services within 14 days, there may be a requirement for a coroner to be involved. The death needs to be registered. We need to decide whether it's a burial or cremation. Some people will want donations given to their charities, and finally, what their funeral arrangements are. It's important to know that everyone will go through the bereavement process. As care staff, you're heavily involved in people's care and day-to-day lives, and we care for people as if they're one of our own family members. So it's not surprising that when we lose somebody, it affects us emotionally as well, and we can go through the bereavement process as well. We know it starts off with shock, it moves into denial, people feel numb, they feel some pain, they start searching for answers, they start yearning, they may feel guilt, they move into anger, symptoms of depression, they start from longing, and then finally acceptance. And it's important to understand the bereavement process so we understand human psychology and how people behave towards the end of life or after the end of life. So in this session, we've looked at why it's important for staff to have some training. We understand the different types of groups. We know how to provide high quality good care. We know how to communicate. We're able to recognise that when life and death has happened, and we're aware of the bereavement cycle. I want you to think about how you will help somebody towards their end of life stages. And remember, it needs to be something that we can start discussing in an open and honest way. Because if we fear death, if we worry about death as care staff, we're going to pass those anxieties on to our patients. It's important that we have discussions very early on with people so that they're aware of what's coming and that they're aware of their rights. So I want to thank you for watching this. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact your managers. And again, please make sure you do extended reading by going onto your websites and reading your end-of-life policies and procedures. And finally, if you want further information, you can go onto the Gold Standards Framework website and read all about how to work towards a good death. Thank you for watching.